Okay. Woohoo. Excellent. Welcome, everybody. Well, I'm going to adjust my camera and everything. Okay. Welcome back to the Mythgard Academy. This is our 16th and final session on the War of the Ring. We are going to finish tonight pretty much no matter what happens. And I have some incentive to be comparatively concise tonight as I'm leaving for Mythmoot first thing in the morning, actually before the morning. But first, we have an exciting announcement, and that is the winner of the election for the next books that we're going to do. So, here it is. Ready? Here it is. This is the suspense. Okay? And the winner is Sauron Defeated! Oh, who saw that coming, right? I mean, oh my goodness. That just came out of nowhere. The next volume of the History of Middle-earth, believe it or not, is the one that we're gonna do. So, okay, that obviously is not the surprise. Nor is this the one that we're going to do next. Right, we are going to do this one. Looking forward to doing this one. Getting the final tail end. Because, of course, you'll notice we've ended the War of the Ring, and the end of the War of the Ring goes through the end of Book 5 as if it were taking Tolkien at his word. Remember, he's like the fifth and final book. That's it, right? And so we get to the end of Book 5 at the end of this book. And then, you know, he's just like, and the end, right? You know, but of course we know Book 6 is going to come. So we will have to do Book 6, which of course gets done at the end of the section that Christopher calls the end of the Third Age, which is the first section of Sauron Defeated. But that's not what we're doing next. The next thing we're going to do, and this one is the big reveal, is Sir Thomas Malory, Le Morte d'Arthur. We are doing the complete works of Sir Thomas Malory, a legitimate work of medieval literature. So we've had now Boethius is no longer alone as our first old book. Well, I guess some people might consider Dracula an old book, though I don't. Anyway, this is going to be so much fun. Now, let me warn you, this is a thick book under any circumstances, right? And we are going to read this in Middle English because it is so much more fun in Middle English. And don't be intimidated because Malory's Middle English is very, very easy. The vowel shift is already happening in Malory's time. And it's super easy to get the hang of. You just kind of, once you get adjusted to the spelling, like, Y's all over the place and that kind of thing, it's really pretty fast to read. So, Karita, good edition. So, or good question, which edition? So, okay, it's complicated. Let me explain this briefly. So, here's the thing. When you're looking for an edition of Sir Thomas Malory, there are several different factors that you have to keep in mind. It is definitely true that not all editions of Malory are going to be created equal. For one thing, many editions of Malory that you will find are not unabridged, right? We're going to read Malory unabridged. We're not going to read any abridgment. We don't play like that. So first, you have to find an unabridged edition of Malory, which can be harder than you think. The second, Tom, exactly. Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, it is not, absolutely. Sir Gawain and the Green Knight is super difficult Middle English. That's like Middle English, which is off towards Anglo-Saxon, whereas Malory's is much more towards modern English. Anyway, okay, so first you've got to find an unabridged edition, right? Then, as I say, I want to read this in Middle English. You've got to when you have basically, this is just kind of general principle, right? Whenever you have the opportunity to read something in the original language instead of in translation, you absolutely should, right? We need to read as close as we can to what Malory wrote. And his language and turns of phrase are so much fun. I promise you, there will be so many things that you would just absolutely miss if you read it in a modern English translation, and it's totally unnecessary to to read Maori in a modern translation, because again, it's not like Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. It's not even like Chaucer. It's super easy to read. So we're going to totally do that. So you need an unabridged edition, and you need an edition in Middle English. But see, we're still not down to the end of the issue here, because, okay, a brief history of Maury's text. So Maury's collection of Arthurian stories was one of the first things ever printed, I should say, in English. When William Caxton started, had the first printing press in England in the late 15th century. Canterbury Tales was the first thing he published. Le Morte d'Arthur was the second thing that he published. Le Morte d'Arthur, by the way, is the title given to it by Caxton. So Caxton publishes Maury's work, and for centuries, Caxton's edition of Maury's work was what we had. Like, that was Sir Thomas Malory. So when you read, for instance, about, say you're reading, C.S. Lewis is Surprised by Joy, and he's talking about how he read Sir Thomas Malory when he was a kid. Caxton's Malory is what he read, right? But then there was a quite dramatic moment. In fact, it's really kind of one of the more dramatic moments of medieval scholarship in the 20th century. The manuscript is discovered, right? Malory's manuscript. In fact, it's the manuscript. You can tell there's physical evidence that it's the manuscript that Caxton used in order to make his printed edition. So it was just a huge discovery. It's called the Winchester manuscript. So now we don't just have Caxton's edition of Malory. Now we have Malory's original manuscript, right? And when you read the Winchester manuscript, you discover that Caxton did what editors do, right? He reorganized stuff. He rearranged things. And I'm not saying that he butchered the book, but it's not the same, right? So there are some people who, when reading or teaching Malory, are like, I don't care, Caxton is what's good, that's like the traditional text and there ain't nothing wrong with it, so we're going to do that. I'm kind of a Winchester manuscript guy. I really like because, and one of the reasons I really like this is you can really see Malory's learning his way, right? As a storyteller, as a writer, by the end, he's really, really good. Less good at the beginning. But anyway, the whole story really kind of develops and grows. So I want you to get an unabridged copy of the text. I want you to get an unabridged copy of the text in Middle English, and I want you to get an unabridged copy of the text in Middle English that is based on the Winchester manuscript and not on Caxton's printed edition. The one that I recommend, the one I've been waving around here, it's just titled Malory Complete Works. It's available in paperback, relatively inexpensive for a book of this heft, and the editor of this is a classic text, one of the first editions. This is one of the first published editions of the Winchester manuscript after it was discovered. It's edited by Eugene Vinaver, Vinaver, Eugene Vinaver. It's not going to top, the bestseller list in most of the Amazon lists or anything, but it should still be available. I'm pretty sure still available. I believe so. It's a very common teaching text. So that's the one that I recommend that we use. Now, you may be asking yourself, because it's not always easy to see, or, they don't always trumpet it on the, in the blurb or something like that. And when you're looking at a text, how do you know whether this is based on Caxton or based on the Winchester manuscript? There's a dead giveaway. Caxton divided it into chapters, right? So when you're looking at a copy of Malory and it's chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, that's Caxton, right? And now let me say, if you read a Caxton text, it's not the end of the world, right? It's fine. It's mostly, again, there are going to be some organization issues. I'm going to try to kind of keep up with that to make sure that people who are reading a Caxton text can follow along, a Caxton-based text can follow along. But I'm going to be working our way through this. Now, into all these policies comes the other issue. I know that many of you, like me, are audiophiles. And many of you are asking yourself, this sounds great, but does an unabridged audio recording of Sir Thomas Malory exist? Because if it doesn't, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to keep up with this class. The answer is yes and no. Does one exist? Does an unabridged edition exist? Indeed, yes. In fact, Audible.com features 2 unabridged editions of Sir Thomas Malory, one older and one newer. Both of them are fine. Both of them I can recommend. The newer one, which is a little bit longer, I think just because the guy reads more slowly generally. But anyway, was it Chris O'Donnell? Or I forget his name, the name of the narrator. But anyway, it's good. I've listened to it. It's fine. But he reads it in modern English. Now, the modern English that he reads follows Malory's English fairly closely. It's not the same, right? Because here's the thing. There doesn't exist any unabridged recording of the Middle English in Middle English with like authentic Middle English pronunciation. You can get snippets of it, but it's not available. The unabridged, there is no like 38-hour recording, and the Audible one is about 38 hours long, the unabridged one. There is a 38-hour reading in modern translation. For some reason, there doesn't exist a 38-hour long unabridged Middle English pronunciation version. This is one of the things that I would like to see exist before I die. That's like on my bucket list. My bucket list is an unabridged Middle English reading of Sir Thomas Malory. Now, we're going to begin our discussion of Sir Thomas Malory by learning how to pronounce it, right? So I'm going to help you guys learn how to pronounce it, and it's going to be super fun. And then you guys can all help me make a recording. And yeah, Yana, this is in the public domain. And I will say, like, of course, there are many texts of this that are publicly available, even in Middle English. But almost every... I have not found... I haven't searched for this in a while, and I haven't had time yet since the discovery of the joyous tidings of Malory's victory here. Anyway, I haven't had time to do full research yet. I have not found an online, publicly available edition of the Winchester manuscript text. There's lots of Caxtons out there, and even both in modern translation and in Middle English. So lots of opportunities to find free online copies of it. And Yana, yeah, I am gonna be researching ebook versions. I haven't yet found one. The Vanaver text is not available in an e-version I was really like crossing my fingers when I was looking that up in Kindle and iBooks and searching around, and I haven't yet found anything yet. Yeah. That one is, Veronica, that one's abridged though, I believe, the one you just linked to. Yeah. Anyway, there's lots of, we'll get to working on this. I'm sure among us we can sort out all of our problems here. One of the upsides, I will be listening along to the Audible recording as well. And it's something that I've never done. So I'm really actually excited to do this. So like for my own personal kind of nerdy interest, I'm actually kind of interested to listen to the Caxton, to listen to a reading based on the Caxton edition while I'm going through the print version of the Winchester text, because I've never done a comparison that close before, just kind of big picture stuff. So I mean, I've done a little bit already, just kind of listening and following along in the text as I go, just to see, how close it is, and it's pretty close. Anyway, so if you're a total audiophile and there's no way you'd have time to read this in print, and you absolutely rely upon an audio version, the unabridged Audible one is fine. It's fine. Tim, this is the Oxford University Press edition of it's Oxford UP that publishes the Vanaver edition. But be careful, because the Oxford Classics Malory, which is edited by Helen Cooper, who's a wonderful scholar, but it's abridged. That's an abridged version, so it says like Winchester manuscript in the title and everything, but it's abridged, so no good. So there we are. Lots of things to, and we'll have a web page, and I'll have a bunch of information up on that. But so also, I got to tell you, this is going to take us a while, right? I mean, we're doing our first ever book that's not in modern English, right? I mean, of course, Boethius was written in Latin, but we were reading it in modern translation. So we're going to read an untranslated, non-modern English text, which also happens to be the second longest book overall that we've read, right? So, and it's not even that far behind Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell being the previous longest single book we've done. I think there's a little bit more print per page on this one than on my edition of Susanna Clark. But anyway, so this is going to take us a while. I'm not going to lie. We're going to be doing Mallory for a while. If we're done with Mallory before New Year's, I'm going to be surprised, to be perfectly honest with you. So it's going to be it's gonna take a while, and I'm not even gonna try. I'm not even gonna try to project exactly. So don't expect from me a list of class sessions like all the way out through the end of the book, because that would be purist. That would be absolutely ridiculous. I think I'm just gonna go a couple sections at a time, see how we do, and then publish a new schedule as we continue to move forward. So we're gonna work our way. And I'm not, obviously we're not going to go, exploring the Lord of the Rings pace with this. But especially in the early stages, I'm not going to hurry. As we're getting adjusted to the language and everything, it's going to take a while. So, yeah. So there we go. Yeah, well, exactly. If I make the thing, then yeah, I'd have to be updating it constantly, and that gets annoying. Easier for me just to do to release a new section of the schedule later on. So I do think we are going to finish Sir Thomas Malory before we finish The Fellowship of the Ring and Exploring the Lord of the Rings. I'm very confident about that. In fact, I bet we'll be done with this before we start the Council of Elrond. There's my bold prediction in Exploring the Lord of the Rings. But and then we have Sauron Defeated to do next year. So the books that that was my first reaction when I heard the two books that won this election. I'm like, well, that's like almost the entire next year, basically worth of books. Yeah, that's the plan. We'll see how that goes. It'll probably be late spring before our next Mythgard Academy election, actually. So there's other things we can do. We'll sort that out. Okay. So no, Craig, we don't have the sign up link yet. We'll be getting that. I'll be releasing that after Mythmoot. My plan is to start on what's the date? Sorry, let me look at my calendar here. What's the I think we're going to take 2 weeks off. So the 11th, that's the one. So yeah, I'm thinking of the 11th. July 11th will be the beginning of our class. That'll give me some time to do things, and we'll get through there. So, okay. No, they will not have covered the Sauron Defeated stuff in the Amazon series by the time we get there. That is the purest hyperbole. Yeah, cool. All right. Hey, look, Brianna's doing all this Arthurian stuff. That's very cool. You're rereading Once and Future King with a friend this summer? Yeah, that's excellent. Very good. Okay. All right. So that is the announcement. So again, I recommend if you're ordering a book, this is the one. Eugene Vinaver, Vinaver, is the editor. This is the Oxford University Press. This is the second edition that I'm holding. I don't think there's a third edition yet, though I'm old enough that sometimes that happens. That thing that I still consider the hot new edition is now like, they're like on the fourth edition by now or something. But anyway, this again, easy to acquire, and like it's selling on Amazon for $23. So there you go. So this is the one that I'm going to be using myself in class. This is also nice because in addition, it has on each page it has line numbers as well as page numbers, so it makes it easier to find stuff and everything. It's pretty cool. $14 used. See, there you go. Bargain, Craig. Bargain. Okay. So, excellent. Oh, and Takako, you're going to love this, right? Nothing better for an English as a second language person than immersing yourself in some Middle English. I'm being a little bit sarcastic about that. It's probably going to confuse you deeply, but it'll be a broadening experience. Definitely a broadening experience. Okay. All right. Cool. Oh, I see that they're trying to post the link to it in Twitch chat, and Moobot is beating on them. That's sad. I'm sure Druid's Fire can help you out there. Okay. All right. Good. Okay. All right. So that is. Oh, awesome, Rachel. So you've not really done any Arthurian reading. Well, Mallory's a great place to start. Mallory, of course, is very far from the beginning of the Arthurian tradition, but Mallory is really sort of the nexus point. Really, I mean, he sets out to be this like summa of all the Arthurian tradition. You know, he's like, I'm gonna tell I'm gonna bring together all the Arthur stories and tell like the biggest, fattest, most authoritative version of the Arthur story. So he really sets out to kind of compile all the medieval stories. So there's a lot of the earlier stuff that gets put into Mallory, and of course Mallory is the one that pretty much everybody who tells the Arthurian story after this comes back to. So Mallory is really kind of the root text for almost all modern treatment of the Arthur story, and he is self-consciously the kind of, he sees himself as sort of the capstone of the medieval tellings of it. So for this way, I think Mallory's an awesome place to start. Then you can move forward, you can move back, but it's a really wonderful foundation for Arthurian stuff. Anyway, yeah, a couple of you say you want to do films. Like, you totally don't want to finish talking about Sir Thomas Malory until next December, right? December 2019. Because there are a lot of Arthurian films we could do. I'm kind of tempted. We'll see. We'll see. No promises. I mean, I love doing the films. I love doing the films. And actually, there are a bunch of Arthurian films that I really enjoyed talking about. Anyway, yeah, it'll be good. Several of you have mentioned Excalibur. It's a classic. No question. It's a classic. Fortunately, that guy did Excalibur instead of doing the Lord of the Rings film that he wanted to do, because that would have been horrible. But anyway, okay. All right. Tom, absolutely. I mean, there's no question. I mean, I didn't even think that needed discussion, right? Like, what is the best Arthurian film ever made, right? Please. Right? It's not. I mean, Excalibur is an interesting film, but it's not Excalibur, right? The best Arthurian film ever made is obviously Monty Python and the Holy Grail. So there it is. Anyway, okay, all right. But let us go on and complete the War of the Ring. Now that we have had our little foretaste of what is to come, and you can tell everybody and get excited, and this is going to be a fantastic project, and really kind of breaking new ground for us, which I'm really excited about. But we also do have this other book to finish, and it's happening tonight because I'm not putting it off any longer. And anyway, it's totally doable, so let's do it. All right, end of the War of the Ring. So we start off with, I said I just had a couple scattered notes from the Battle of Pelennor Field that I wanted to finish up on after we were looking at that really incredible scene with Éowyn, and that like Éowyn triumphant scene, right? And the death of the Wizard King, as Nazgul, right? And the whole the decapitation of the beast, which seems to lead to the death of the death of the Wizard King. And exactly, Karita. Éowyn in boss mode. That was exactly what we saw last time. Okay, a few scattered notes here. Long sojourn of rest in Minas Tirith and coming of Finduilas, written above, and Galadriel. Now, Finduilas, of course, is, as everybody knows, the name of Elrond's daughter. And this is kind of tricky because it makes me wonder what that implies. You're a half-elf. Do you name your kids after people or you don't? You're Elrond, I think you don't, right? I mean, we know this is a thing. Elves don't name people after dead people because there are no dead people, right, when you're an elf. So, you name somebody after Grandpa, then like sooner or later he's going to meet Grandpa and it's going to be awkward. So, they don't do that. In Elvish culture. But of course, as we've seen, especially in Gondor, they do it all the time, right? Like, there are Silmarillion names everywhere in Gondor, and those are not recyclings. Those are deliberate, like, Hurin of the Keys is named after Hurin Thalion, and Thalion, the father of the kid whose name I have forgotten now, who is not Birgil, but the forerunner of Birgil. His name is Thalion, right? So we've got a Hurin, we've got a Thalion, we've got a Turin, we've got a Turambar, we've got everybody, right? Everybody is not to mention Mablung and everybody else. So Finduilas. Either A, she's named after Finduilas. Now, so everybody remembers who Finduilas was, right? Finduilas is the daughter of Orodreth. She was the one who falls in love with Turin from Gondolin, right? She falls in love with Turin Turambar, and she's the one whose life he fails to save, and if he had saved her life, he could possibly have averted his doom, but she doesn't. Exactly. Elf maiden pinned to tree by orcs, you've got it. So Finduilas is... So either Elrond has named his daughter after Finduilas, the daughter of Orodreth, or Tolkien is saying he's going to use the name Finduilas for the daughter of Elrond, and he's going to retroactively rename Turin's unreciprocated girlfriend something else, right? And I don't really know. Now, Julie, that's a great question. Where was Finduilas at this time? Fully formed. In fact, the fullest version of Finduilas's part of the story that is ever told has already been written. The first version, yes, the first version of the alliterative lay of the Children of Hurin, which Tolkien started writing way back, like in the late teens, early 20s. That went through, got a little past Finduilas, got into Nargothrond, but not quite to the destruction of Nargothrond by the dragon, as I'm recalling. So the story of Finduilas and her unrequited love for Turin and everything, it is more fully developed in that version of the story, in the first draft of the unpublished, of course, in his lifetime, alliterative lay of the Children of Hurin. That's the fullest version of the Finduilas story that we get anywhere else, right? The version that we get in Unfinished Tales is the second longest one, but the one in the poem is even more. So the story of Finduilas, the Silmarillion character, has already received long since, like decades ago, its largest writing. So it totally exists, right? So if he decides to take the name Finduilas and give it to Elrond's daughter, then that's going to involve a lot of revision. Now, he's shown himself willing to do this before. Also remember that he's done it before, right? I mean, he painted himself into a corner with Glorfindel. Glorfindel, you may recall, if you did the Return of the Shadow with me, Glorfindel came in right on the cusp, like immediately as he had made the step, right? Had taken the firewall down and decided, oh my goodness, this is going to be so much cooler if this little story I'm writing is actually contiguous with the Silmarillion tradition, right? If I make these one big story, that is going to be the coolest thing ever. Glorfindel happens like literally pages after that. Like he's writing notes projecting what happens, and Glorfindel comes up and Glorfindel's name is used there. And it's still a little doubtful. Is he recycling the Glorfindel concept still? Is he still like kind of in the sort of like, is that still in the pattern that he's in and he hasn't fully broken himself of the habit of recycling, which he'd been doing throughout The Hobbit? Or has he made a decision? I mean, he doesn't actually make the concrete decision to say, okay, yes, Glorfindel of Rivendell is the same Glorfindel that was killed by the Balrog, and he just came back to Middle-earth, and I'm going to find a mechanism to bring him back because it's the same dude. He does make that decision, and but he doesn't make that final decision on Glorfindel until, like, I don't know what, 5 years before, in the 5 years before his death, Tolkien's death, I mean. So we'll get to that, I think, in volume 12 of the History of Middle-earth. So, anyway, but the point is, he's shown himself willing to do this kind of thing. It's very clear he loves Finduilas, and he loves the name Finduilas. You may recall, he is going in the end to kind of have it both ways, right? He's not, of course, going to name the daughter of Elrond Finduilas, but he's still going to name somebody Finduilas. Do you remember who Finduilas is? She still comes in, right? She still makes the cut, even though she's not the daughter of Elrond. Exactly, James, you got it. Yeah, Denethor's wife, Faramir's mom. Exactly. Yep. But that, of course, that's totally kosher, right? You know, when you've got, then you just get, she's a Gondorian woman who is named after Finduilas. So that becomes straightforward at that point. But anyway, so, all right. Forgetting the name then for a second, the daughter of Elrond, wow, is coming to Minas Tirith. That's interesting. Yeah. And Galadriel is coming with her, I guess. Won't that be fun? I wonder if there's anything interesting. I wonder if she's coming for any particular reason. That'd be good to know, right? There's been no reference to this yet. I'll come back to this in a second. I have a complaint. I need to do some grutching. By the way, it's one of my favorite Middle English words. It's a Chaucer word. Grutch. Grutch. To grutch means to complain. I love the word grutch because it's almost onomatopoetic. A couple of my students a few years back actually made me a sign for my desk that says no grutching. But anyway, yeah. It's like kvetch, Arthur. Yeah, very, very similar to kvetch, the Yiddish word. But I like grutch even better. Grutch seems to me even more onomatopoetic than kvetch, personally. But Jennifer, I don't know for sure, but I would be very surprised if grouch is not from the same root. I don't know for sure, but again, it would kind of shock me if it weren't. Anyway, okay, all right. We'll come back to Finduilas later on, daughter of Elrond, in a few minutes. So, hobbits all go home via Rohan, funeral of Theoden, and then through Gap and up west of Misty Mountains to Rivendell and then home. Yes, said Sam as he closed the book, that all happened a long time ago. Now, remember, these are just like sort of scattered notes that he's writing here, right? And so you can see, you know, as so often happens, this sort of bits of dialogue just kind of floating up in his brain as he's writing, right? Remember that he was not going to, the way that he was going to get out of writing book 6, right? The plan is that he's going to get to the end of book 5, and then he's going to do the end briefly, right? He's not going to write the whole thing. He's just going to say, like, they came home, and then he's going to have Sam close the book. He was going to end the book with Sam and his, like, kids and grandkids, right? You know, so he's going to be, you know, Elder Gamgee reading out of the Red Book. So he closes the book, and he's like, that happened a long time ago. And then his kids were going to ask questions, like, oh, but Dad, what happened to, what happened to Faramir? What? And then he was going to answer the questions, right, in order to and so that was Tolkien's original plan, as you may remember, for the end of the book. So I love that we can see that bit of future Sam dialogue bubbling up through. Aragorn will only enter as Lord of the Forod, not as king. Lords ride in and see Theoden lying in state. Where is Gandalf? He comes in late or later and tells of Theoden's fall and Yorith's words. They go to houses of healing, and Aragorn asks for Athelas. He heals the sick. Yorith says he must be king. After supper, he heals many sick. Council next day. Gandalf's advice. Merry wakes up feeling nearly well. While council is on, perhaps, Gimli, Legolas, and Pippin talk. They do something or other, and hear of the love of Éowyn for Aragorn at Dunharrow, and of the great ride to Pelargir. The lords ride east. 1,000 Rohirrim, Dol Amroth, and so on, perhaps. And a first force to hold Morgul. They ride into shadow of ambush. Peril! Let's go back in there and face the peril. Okay. So, right. We can see things beginning to take shape. I love the way some of these things come out. Possibly my favorite line here is, Yorith says he must be king, right? Yeah. I don't know, Karina. I'm not sure if they're getting just a little bit of the peril down there, or if they're really, I think he's taking them single-handedly. Anyhow, let me emphasize, though, that many of these other things we're gonna be talking about a little bit more. I want to focus on Éowyn here. Éowyn and Finduilas, right? They hear of the love of Éowyn for Aragorn at Dunharrow. That happened? When did that happen? Here's my complaint. I have a complaint to lodge. Now, I don't think I've done this yet. I've disagreed sometimes with Christopher, right? Usually deferentially, almost always tentatively. Okay, no, sometimes not tentatively, but many times tentatively I've disagreed with him. But I very much try not to complain about something. But this is my first complaint, I think, in the whole history. Okay, maybe it's probably not the first, but it's the first one that I remember. I've forgotten the rest if I've made others. What's the deal with his complete omission of talking about the development of the Éowyn Aragorn love story? I mean, we get nothing on that Éowyn. I mean, apart from the fact that she, remember, all along, right? Every passage we've got about Éowyn has been like, kills the Witch King and dies. Kills the Witch King and dies, right? And we saw, like, she was the initial love interest, right? And then we moved away from that, and then she's like, shield maiden, gonna kill the Wizard King and die. I keep calling him the Witch King, which I probably shouldn't do. But, okay. So, fine. Like, he said nothing else about this. And now all of a sudden we find out, wait, okay, so now I've been waiting, right? As we've been going through, I'm like, wait, so where's the bit? It's been forever since I've read this. I'm like, where's the bit where we find out about how she was actually like, has this unrequited love for Aragorn and that leads her to despair? Oh, okay, wait, I guess it's, happening now already. So it's been happening, and we just weren't told. When did it start happening? So now I got to go back, and I'm like, okay, so now I remember that Éowyn, there was a point where Éowyn was in despair. You remember she was like, hey, Theoden, you should bring the shield maidens, and I'll rustle up some shield maidens, and we'll come with you. And he's like, that sounds great. So she goes with him openly from the muster down to Minas Tirith originally. Right. And then there are a couple other versions where she's still going openly and not in disguise. And now all of a sudden she's in disguise. And almost as soon as she's in disguise, she becomes Durnhelm. Right. And she becomes like she becomes Fae, seeking after death. Right. I now have to guess that the unrequited love story with Aragorn has worked its way back in there, but he's given us nothing. Christopher Tolkien has given us no indication of when and how that story grew. And I get that, like, he can't include every bit of every text, but that kind of seems to me important, like that's an important thread of the story. And yes, like whether or not she survives killing the Wizard King, or whether or not the Wizard King survives being killed by Éowyn, as we saw a couple weeks ago. Those are important. I'm not trying to say we should get less of that, but I would have wanted just some note, just a passing reference maybe. Oh, and by the way, the Éowyn unrequited love plot has popped in there. Okay. But anyway, so instead we have to guess. But of course, we finally get, the best we get, of course, is we get this description of Éowyn's grief, right? See, Booful in Twitch is saying, skip the kissing bits. That's exactly what I was thinking earlier today. When I was prepping for class, I went back and I'm like, wait a second, what happened to because I came to this passage and I'm like, wait, what happened with the Éowyn story? And I was exactly thinking of the Princess Bride movie and being like, wait, Christopher, come on, how old are you? What are you like? What, skip the kissing bits? Like, come on. Anyway, okay. End of complaint. So this is jumping forward a little bit. This is from Legolas and Gimli's Paths of the Dead story. I think the Rohirrim believe, this is Merry to begin with. I think the Rohirrim believe that inside there, that is inside the Dwemerberg, dwell dead men, or their shadows, out of a past long before they came to that land. So they told us, said Legolas, and they forbade us to go in, but Aragorn could not be turned from it. He was in a grim mood, and that fair lady that lies now in the houses below, Éowyn, wept at his going. Indeed, at the last, in the sight of all, she set her arms about him, imploring him not to take the road, and when he stood there unmoved, stern as stone, she humbled herself to kneel in the dust. It was a grievous sight. But do not think that he was not moved, said Gimli. Indeed, I think Aragorn himself was so deeply grieved that he went through all perils after that like a man that can feel little more. He raised her up and kissed her hand, and then without a word we set out, before the sun came over the black ridges of the mountain. I do not know how to put it into words, but even as we passed the last great standing stone, a dread fell on me, of what I could not say, and my blood seemed running cold. I lifted my feet like lead across the threshold of that darkling door, and hardly had we passed within, when a blindness of very night came upon us. Karina thinks this is really gossipy. Legolas dishing the dirt here. See, look, Legolas and Gimli are mature enough to talk about this, right? And Tony says, "Is this a kissing book?" Yeah, apparently we're concerned. Because see, now I'm going back to those earlier passages about when Aragorn first went to the Paths of the Dead, right after Tolkien figured out what was in the Dwemerberg, right? And we knew that Éowyn was resistant to the idea of his going in, but I would have loved to know if there was evidence from those early drafts that, like, what was the motivation? We kind of speculated about it a little bit at the time, like, okay, she's not into his going to the Paths of the Dead. Is this because we've got the unrequited love story going on? And we don't know. So anyway, so that's my complaint. So where it exactly came in, we don't know, because Christopher didn't tell us. But it's clear that by this time, right, by the time we get to the story of the Paths of the Dead and the Battle of Pelennor Field, these later battles of Pelennor Field, so I'm gonna assume by the time we get the Durnhelm stuff with Éowyn, we are in the unrequited love story. Right. Now, we don't have yet any indication of the resolution of that. The ultimate matching of Éowyn and Faramir, we've seen no reference to it. But, maybe we're just skipping the kissing parts. How are we to know? Anyway. No, Lindsay, I don't have any reason to think that there was evidence that any of that stuff was left out, Lynn. It's just, we don't know, right? I mean, so much of these earlier drafts we're reliant upon Christopher to tell us, he just like says, these are the important bits, right? Here are the particularly interesting parts of this particular draft. And mostly I have found his, I find his impression of what I'm going to find interesting fairly reliable. He and I are usually on a fairly similar wavelength when it comes to what we find interesting. Sometimes he's a little more interested in the geography than I am, but I can forgive him that. Okay, I found that easier to forgive when I didn't realize that I was. That the extra discussion of chronology and geography was coming at the cost of the Éowyn and Aragorn story. But it's fine. I'm over it. So it's good. Anyways, so it's here. It's here. When it came, we don't know. Again, I definitely do. We have looking back in retrospect and knowing that it's here now, and so it must have come in at some point. I think that we have from that some circumstantial evidence. If I had to guess now, I would say the moment at which it was it became Durnhelm, right? When she became despairing and seeking after death. I would guess that that's the point at which the unrequited love story came in. Now, Kevin, you're absolutely right. Kevin says, how do we know what we're missing? There might be lots more that Christopher left out. Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, no, they're totally, that is very likely. And, Kevin, I certainly think about that sometimes when I'm looking at a passage that he says is really interesting and then he comments on some things in it. And I'm like, yeah, I find it interesting too. But not for the reason that you're like, okay, like your stuff is cool too. But there are these other things that he doesn't emphasize at all, which happen to be in the passage that he said that I find very interesting. So, yeah, so this is why doing archival work at Marquette is awesome. And it would be really fun to actually be able to. Now, the downside to that is you have to interpret Tolkien's handwriting yourself, which is a challenge. But anyway, yeah, it would be fun to have the unexpurgated electronic version of Tolkien's manuscript texts. That would be awesome. I would support that, but we don't have it. Yeah. See, Brian, in retrospect, I would say that Éowyn's love for Aragorn was already implicit in how she reacts to Aragorn going on the paths of the dead, but it wasn't explicit, right? It didn't say that explicitly, at least not in the passages we were given. So I was hesitant at the time to ascribe it to that, especially since Éomir's upset too, and he doesn't seem to have he doesn't seem to want to marry Aragorn. So, it seemed to me entirely possible that, or rather, it didn't seem to me necessary to say that this proves, that she's already crushing on him at that point, but it might be. But again, in retrospect, I think it very likely. But again, we don't know. Yeah, exactly, Wynn. It is quite possible that Éowyn is just creeped out by the paths of the dead, and it's nothing to do with adoring Aragorn. Yeah, especially since, remember, Lynn, exactly. At that moment, right? Éowyn, when Aragorn comes to Dunharrow by himself, well, not by himself, he's with the rest of them, but like not with, so Theoden and Éowyn and everybody else, or Éomer are not there. Éowyn she's like the representative of the Rohirrim, right? So she is the instrument of expressing, like, the Rohirrim won't go into that. Like, she is the voice of the cultural taboo, right? The Rohirric cultural taboo against entering the Dwimmerberg, right? If she's not going to be like, no, don't go in there, whatever you do, then how's he going to learn it? How is any of us going to learn it, right? So I agree, Lynn. It is. That's why I wasn't saying at the time like, oh well, that's a slam dunk, right? She's obviously into him, because that's an important role, right? For her to be saying, nobody goes into the, like, don't do it, man. Like, you're valuable. You're like you're general and stuff. You're like a hero of the wars. Don't throw your life away, doing this stupid forbidden thing. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, all right. But I said I'm going to stop complaining, so I'm going to stop complaining. Let's move on. Okay. I love this. Pippin meets Merry wandering half-blind and witless, as in scene previously written, but humorous. But not humorous. Not humorous. Merry is also taken to sick house. Faramir, Éowyn, Merry. King Theoden laid on bier in the hall of the tower, covered with gold. His body is embalmed after the manner of Gondor. Long after, when the Rohirrim carried it back to Rohan and laid it in the mounds, it was said that he slept there in peace unchanged, clad in the cloth of gold of Gondor, save that his hair and beard still grew, but were golden, and a river of gold would at times flow from Theoden's howe. Also a voice would be heard crying, "Arise, arise, riders of Theoden, fell deeds awake, forth, Eorlingas," when peril threatened. Okay. Yeah, Nancy, that's exactly the mode that we are in here. Nancy says, is Theoden a saint or something? This sounds exactly like a medieval saint's life. This is just the kind of thing. In fact, Nancy, I was this close before I thought of my funny pun. I was this close to having the subtitle of this slide be the canonization of, or like, Theoden up for canonization, because this is exactly the kind of manifestation of supernatural miracles around the burying place of a dead person, which tends to have them nominated for sainthood fairly quickly. So yeah, Nancy, I was interested that we got that kind of angle on that, right? But of course, remember, this is something we've seen before. Recall that we saw something similar with Thorin Oakenshield, right? As you know, the Orcrist, which lies upon him, shines whenever enemies approach, right? So not just the physical proximity of goblins to Orcrist itself, but whenever the mountain is threatened, a supernatural warning, right, is given to his people. So Theoden does something similar. Veronica, Helm is a really interesting other example, right? Now with Helm, we don't get the same. It's not exactly the same as with Helm. What we get are legends of him. He gets a mysterious death. It's not exactly mysterious, sort of mysterious. We get these, remarkable legends of Helm, but we don't get post-mortem supernatural manifestations with Helm, right? Unless you want to count the horns in the deep. I think that's probably what you're referring to. So yeah, to some extent, we get a similar kind of thing. It's not spontaneous with Helm, right? So like it's not like a car alarm for Helm's Deep, right? Enemies come in and the horns pick up. It's rather a horn that is sounded is taken up. So it's the echoes in the deep sort of supernaturally magnified, right? Whereas with Theoden, his voice will cry out, the early warning alarm when peril threatens, which is pretty cool. The gold is fascinating. Okay, so we get the two things which seem to be connected, right? The fact that, three things, technically. His body doesn't decay, right? So Theoden's body remains uncorrupt in his tomb, which is already kind of a big deal, right? And his hair and beard continue to grow. Like indefinitely? Did somebody have to go and give Theoden's corpse a haircut regularly? Do you have to hire a special post-mortem barber? Not that much call for that, right? But anyway, a special necro barber, right? Who has to go and cut Theoden's hair. Because if he's uncorrupt there in his tomb, that means presumably people can see, right? So is that like a tourist attraction? No, I'm not just making jokes, creator. No, I'm getting there. Because see, this would mean then that you could actually, I'd think that then the because see, I'm thinking, Nancy, I'm thinking in like medieval saints' lives terms, right? Because you know what would happen, right? If this, I mean, there's no question what would happen here, right? Is that we would cut Theoden's hair and beard, and then the hair clippings of Theoden would become relics, right? No question. But then the river of gold flows from Theoden's house. Right. And of course, if you're not thinking of Thorin now, I can't help you. Right. So, OK, so a river of gold would sometimes flow from Theoden's house. So the link, obviously, between the ever growing hair and beard of Theoden and the river flowing out is the color. Right. The goldness of them. Now, why emphasize gold? And that is his youth. Right. The restoration of his youth. So what that is kind of commemorating, recalling, sort of perpetuating the memory of is the healing of Theoden, right? The rejuvenation of Theoden, how his, vigor at least, if not actual youth, is restored in his age through the agency of Gandalf, and he arises from his apparent decrepitude, right? Yes, it's always a good day when you get to use the word decrepitude. He arises from his apparent decrepitude and goes off to war and dies heroically and valiantly and everything. So, I mean, that's so the youth, the goldenness of the hair and beard would clearly be a recollection of that. That would be kind of like the point, right? Because the river of gold, of course, the river of gold, I'm thinking obviously of the river shall flow with gold when the king under the mountain returns in The Hobbit. But this is different, right? I don't think this is a wealth issue necessarily. I mean, maybe it's a wealth thing. And I don't even know what a river of gold means. A river of gold would at times flow from Theoden's house. A river whose water happened to be gold, like the river in Mirkwood was black? A river like actual gold, what, coins? Minted coins? Raw nuggets of gold flowing out? I can't imagine that it's actual chunks of gold metal just pouring out of Theoden's tomb. I mean, that seems like a little too much of a good thing for one thing, but and also it doesn't fit. It doesn't work. Like I said, the preservation of his body, the perpetual growth of his youthly golden beard and hair, that all kind of fits, right? It fits. It conveys a coherent message, right, to the posterity of Rohan. And sometimes treasure comes pouring out does not seem to me to coherently fit with anything that we get in there. Obviously, it's very much within the idiom of the King Under the Mountain, right? But it's not really within the idiom of the King of Rohan. Now, we do get the ring giver thing, right? We do get that, like, that's all, like, it's gifts proceed from the king and stuff. So it's not like gold is not in any way associated with the King of Rohan, but I still just, I'm not feeling it. I don't see it. In which case, if it's not actually gold metal flowing in some sense, presumably not molten and like scorching everybody, then it would be, again, a vision only? Or, again, like liquid, which is golden and therefore symbolic, right? So it's that would fit. Like a symbolic thing is exactly the kind of thing that I would sort of expect to happen. A purely symbolic visual manifestation would be in keeping, right? What kind of message would that send? I'm not... Catriona, that's it. You've got it, Catriona. Of course, yes. The river of gold flowing out recalls the sunlight that breaks when the darkness flees before him at Battle of Pelennor Field. Yeah, got it. You got it. That's it. The sunlight. Yeah. I think it's got to be sunlight there. Yeah, no, it's not golden beer flowing out of the beer thing. It's just a pun. It's not actual. And I know, Yana, it's exactly the same spelling even in Dutch. I know. But yeah, no, it's not. It's not beer. It's not beer. Though admittedly, a river of beer flowing out of his tomb would be more in the idiom, right? Like, I could believe that sooner than I could believe gold nuggets rolling out of his tomb. That I could believe. But I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced. Anyway, okay. So, of course, this is going to be short-lived, though not instantly discarded, right? We do get a second version of this, the Theoden's How stuff. So, obviously it's not just a fleeting idea that Tolkien had, though of course it is going to ultimately get cut. But of course you could argue it's one of those things that doesn't get included explicitly in the text, but that doesn't mean conceptually it's been cut out, right? So you can, if you want to imagine a river of beer flowing from the tomb of Theoden in perpetuity, you can do that, right? It's fine. It's fine. I'm not going to judge you. Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's keep going. Gandalf's puzzling comment to me. Speaking of Merry, of course. He should have been born in honor into this city, he said. Greater was the wisdom of Elrond than mine. For if I had had my way, neither you nor he, Pippin, would have set out, and then far more grievous would the evils of this day have been. Faramir and Éowyn would be dead, and the Black Captain would be abroad to work ruin on all hope. Okay, so someone is misremembering here, right? And it's either Gandalf or Tolkien is misremembering, because of course, as Christopher reminds us, in the Council of Elrond, it was Gandalf who supported Merry and Pippin coming, and Elrond who wanted to send them home and was particularly opposed to their coming along with the party. And I, of course, remembered that right away just because I love this passage in the published text, because Gandalf seems, in the published text, Gandalf seems never to miss an opportunity of doing a distant I told you so to Elrond, right? I mean, he is almost intolerably smug about the fact that he was right and Elrond was wrong on this point. He goes out of his way to bring it up a couple times in the published text. So it was just really funny to me to notice that the first time it happened, Gandalf's very first opportunity to brag at his own cleverness, right, and point out that he was right and Elrond was wrong, Gandalf messed it up, right? Gandalf instead got it backwards. And so Gandalf's first impulse was to be humble, right? And then Tolkien revises it and makes him amusingly smug. So that was good. All right. I now want to look at two longer sequences. First, the development of the Paths of the Dead story. I'm not going to worry too much about the placement. Of course, it originally emerged as a story told by Legolas and Gimli to Merry and Pippin in the Houses of Healing. And then, of course, he decides, you'll recall, at the time we didn't get the Passing of the Grey Company chapter at all. That was just kind of shoehorned into the Muster of Rohan chapter. And so now the decision to go back and create the Passing of the Grey Company and to shift a lot of this narrative, both from this point to that earlier chapter, and also to take it out of first-person narrative by Legolas and Gimli, much of it, and put it into the frame of the narrator, is something that comes in the later stages here. So the frame of the story is them meeting up in the Houses of Healing, and I really liked this, the tone of this. We haven't gotten too much of this tone in the latter parts of this story. Legolas is talking about the gulls and no peace shall I have again in Middle-earth. Say not so, said Gimli. There are countless things still to see there, and great work to be done. But if all the fair folk that are also if all the fair folk that are also wise take to the havens, it will become a duller world for those that are doomed to stay. It is already rather dull, said Merry, sitting and swinging his legs as he sat on the brink of the wall. At least it is for hobbits, cooped up in a stone city and troubled with wars, while their visitors talk and not together about their strange journey and tell no one else about it. I saw you at the Hornburg, but then I thought you were going to Dunharrow, but you come on ships out of the south. How did you do it? Yes, do tell us, said Pippin. I tried Aragorn, but he was too full of troubles, and just smiled. First of all, remarkable that Aragorn's reaction is to smile. James is just saying the same thing. James Oakley says, when I'm too full of troubles, I just smile. Yeah, it's a fascinating reaction there. But he was too full of troubles and just smiled. But, in the end, I think that we don't need too much explanation, really. Why did he smile? Who is he talking to, right? It's not his troubles that are making him smile. It's Pippin that's making him smile, right? When Pippin says, I tried Aragorn, I suspect that he tried Aragorn in a very similar way to how Merry is trying Legolas and Gimli right now, right? But I just love that transition from this, very sort of high and wistful comment by Gimli, just, redolent with the loss and grief that is, intrinsic to Middle-earth. It will become a duller world for those that are doomed to stay. And to see Merry seize on that and, just kind of turn it into a joke. It's already rather dull, at least for us, right? While their visitors talk and not together about their strange journey and tell no one else about it. It's awesome. So yeah, I think that it's we can see, I suspect, in both passages, not only the actual humor of Merry here and in his light-hearted hobbitry, but Pippin's testimony of Aragorn's smile seems to suggest, like, this is one of the things that they do, right? And I think that that's really, fun. Okay, but Paths of the Dead. Okay, going back now to the earlier versions of what. So, going into the Dwemerberg, that there are dead men who are oath breakers there, and that they need to fulfill their oath. Remember, we finally got there in the prophecies earlier on. The prophecies, instead of being like the three lords, elf, human, and dwarf, shall come down, and this is why Legolas and Gimli were really important, because they had to be there to fulfill the prophecy. We got the prophecy finally talks about the oath breakers, and so we had gotten there. But what actually happened had been less clear, so we're trying to iron that out. Aragorn takes Paths of the Dead, morning of 8 March, passes tunnels of mountains. This tale will have to be told in brief later, probably at Feast of Victory in Minas Tirith, by Gimli and or Legolas. They see skeleton and armor of Bealdor, son of Brago, but except for dark and a feeling of dread, meet no evil. The tunnels become the issuing caverns of Morthond, that is the river. It is dusk, changed to afternoon, of 8 March, when Aragorn and his company come out into the uplands at the head of the Vale of Morthond and ride to the Stone of Erech. This was a black stone, according to legend brought from Númenor, set up to mark the meeting place of Isildur and Anarion with the last king of the Dark Men of the Mountains, who swore allegiance to the sons of Elendil, vowing to aid them and their kin forever, even though death should take us. That was a rash vow. The stone was enclosed in a now ruined tower, and there had been kept one of the Palantiri. No men went near the tower. Rumor of terror flies through the vales, for the king of the dead has come back, and beheld behind the living men a great host of shadow men, some riding, some striding, but all moving like the wind are seen. Okay, so, Aragorn, Gimli, and remember that the thing that which was to me most mind-blowing about those earlier Paths of the Dead passages was that the Stone of Erech was a palantir, right? And so, like, of course, Isildur brought it out of Numenor, right? It's a palantir. You're not going to leave that behind, right? So we see this is the kind of the transitional moment, which is really fun, right? So the Stone of Erech was a palantir, and it's going to become just a rock in the ground, right? Which is like a commemorative rock is what it's going to become. But in this transitional stage, it's both, right? So we've got the Stone of Erech, which is now no longer just a palantir. Now it's a big rock in the ground. Oh, but there's also a palantir there in the tower. So there was a tower, and one of the palantir is there, and there's this rock in the ground, which is commemorative of the vow. Because remember, we didn't have the vow before, right? The only point of going to Erech, originally, when they were going to Erech the whole time, when there were no oath breakers in the bargain, right? But the reason they were going to Erech was to get the palantir. Now they're going to meet the Oathbreakers. Oathbreakers are a big deal, so the stone becomes this commemorative thing to commemorate the vow. And notice that it seems that they doomed themselves. In fact, it's not obvious from this account right here that there are even Oathbreakers, right? I mean, if anything, it's the keeping of their oath, right? They're the ones who swore the oath that they would keep on going, right? Even though death should take us. So they're lingering as unquiet spirits is not a product of their disobedience, right? Not a product of their breaking the vow, but rather it is the keeping of their vow. Now, we've already had references to the Oathbreakers. Again, at the end of the earlier passages, we've seen that concept already come in, and I'm not suggesting that it's not obvious to me that he's discarding that here, but it's not totally obvious that he's not yet either. At least in any case, the terms of the vow, which are quoted, right, specifically, at least seem to open the door to the possibility that they might not be breaking their oath, but rather just keeping it beyond all reasonable expectation, in fact. But if that's the case, this is their high water mark, because they're going to get less admirable after this. Aragorn goes to Erech at midnight, blows horns, and dim shadow horns echo him, and unfurls banner. The star on it shines in the dark. He finds the palantir, unsullied, buried in a vault. From Erech he sets out, added dark, morn, of March 9, added at 5 a.m. I love the additions, right, when he's working out the chronology. Read from Erech to fords of Lameduin, say Linhir, is 175 miles direct, about 200 by road. Great terror and wonder preceded his march. At Linhir on Lameduin, men of Lebanon and Lamadan are defending passage of river against Haradwaith. Aragorn reaches Linhir at evening on March 10 after 2 days and nights forced riding with host of shadow behind in the deepening dark of Mordor. All fly before him. Aragorn crosses Lameduin into Lebanon at morning of March 11th and hastens to Pelargir, added 100 miles. Okay, so terror and wonder is preceding his march. He blows the horns at Erech at midnight, and we get the shadow horns echoing him, and he unfurls his banner in a dramatic moment, which is actually dramatic in this draft. That always struck me as one of the most really interesting kind of the moments in the published Return of the King, at the end of the passing of the Great Company when they get to Erech, right? The published text says, it was dark. Like, so they unfurled the banner, and the banner opens, and behold! Exclamation point. It was dark, and you couldn't really see. It was black, like you couldn't really see it. It doesn't say anything about it. Like, we don't get a star shining on it in the dark. It's like, behold, it was black. And really, you couldn't actually see anything. So, like, behold the thing that you can't see is kind of how the narrator plays it in the published text, which is slightly peculiar. Interesting to me that his original version has the shining star. So, like, it's the banner is luminous, right? I mean, it shines like you can read by this banner. I don't know if it's quite that bright, or maybe if you have good eyes. But anyway, it's actively luminous in the darkness. And then he takes that out. He dials that back in the published text. Jennifer is asking if Aragorn is starting a Palantir collection. Yeah, sort of. But see, you see the point though. It's unsullied. This is why he wants the Palantir, because the Orthanc stone is dangerous, right? I mean, like that line is tapped, right? But he can get an untapped line from the stone of Erech. I mean, that is the other stone, the portable stone, the seeing stone of Erech, not the big one, bigger one, not as big as it is in Lotro. Anyway, so that's the unsullied. That's how I take unsullied, and that seems to be the point here. In fact, the adding of the word unsullied in parentheses there in this outline seems to me even meant for an explanation as to why he wants the Palantir. But you remember, that was the point all along. When he looks into the Palantir, what has he discovered? There are other Palantiri, right? And I'm going to go get me one. There's one at Erech, and I'm there. Is there something that happens if he reunites all the Palantiri, Tony? I don't really know. Sorry, I'm laughing because I saw Boomful's comment. Out of box, but still in good condition. Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly the Palantir of Erech there. Anyway, yeah. So the Palantir is going to become, I mean, that's going to drop out entirely. The need for an unsullied Palantir. It's not, I mean, in fact, you'll notice the Palantiri are another thing that get dialed back a lot, right? He looks in it less often. There's not really any realistic chance of it blowing up in his face and killing him. Sauron doesn't even think about his own Palantir in the moment of his death, right? Gandalf doesn't brain anybody with one. So the Palantiri are going to play a lesser role as the revisions go on. Okay. All right. Now we're getting Eucatastrophe on Eucatastrophe. Aragorn crosses into Lebanon on March 11th morning and rides with all speed to Pelargir. The shadow host follows. The Haradrim fly before him in dismay. Some, hearing news of his coming in time, get their ships off and escape down Anduin, but most are not manned. Most of the ships, that is, presumably. Early on 12th, Aragorn comes on the fleet, driving all before him. Many of the ships are stuffed with captives, and they are partly manned, especially the oars, by captives taken in raids on Gondor, or slave descendants of captives taken long before. These revolt. So Aragorn captures many ships and mans them, though several are burned. He works feverishly because he knows that doom of Minas Tirith is near if he does not come in time. The night the shadow host vanishes and goes back to the mountain valleys and finally disappears into the paths of the dead and is never seen again to come forth. There is no rest for the Oathbreakers, right? They're just going back to the paths of the dead, and they're going to darn well stay there from now on. Notice also the shadow host is following. So what are they doing exactly? Right? They're scaring folks away. On the 12th, they're coming on the fleet and driving all before him, right? But hang on. The Haradrim fly before him in dismay. That is because, dead folks. Some, hearing news of his coming in time, get their ships off and escape down the Anduin. So when Aragorn comes on the fleet, it's the fleet on the river, right? So they run away or sail away, right, on their ships, but some of their ships are not manned, so they leave some of their ships behind. So if I'm reading this correctly, Aragorn then gets into the boats, right, the abandoned boats, and pursues them, the ones that made it out, right, onto the river. So when he comes on them and drives all before him, and saves, and the captives revolt, this is happening. This is battle at sea, except it's on the river, right? Battle on river, boat to boat, battling. Question on the, are the dead folks there? No, dead folks. I don't know. Are they there? He's still driving all before him. Are the dead folks in the boat to boat fighting here? Not really clear if that's if that's happening. No, so Stephen, they're heading out towards sea, yes, but he catches them and then takes those boats, and then they got to sail back up to Minas Tirith. Yeah. They've got to move. Okay. On morning of 15th, written above 14, a wind rises added at dawn and freshens from southwest. The cloud and gloom begins to roll back. They hoist sails and now go with, struck out, more speed. About 9 a.m., they can be seen by watchers from Minas Tirith who are dismayed. As soon as Aragorn catches sight of the city and of the enemy, he hoists his standard, the white crown with the stars of the sun and moon on either hand, Oendil's badge. A sun gleam from the southeast lights it up, and it shines afar like white fire. Aragorn lands and drives off enemy. Okay, first of all, notice Oendil's badge? White crown with stars of sun and moon on either hand. Makes sense, right? White crown in the middle for Osgiliath, which is the capital, and then you've got the sun and moon, so it's Minas Anor and Minas Ithil, right? So this is a Gondorian symbol, Oendil's badge, right? Much more explicitly Gondorian, right? Than later on. Yeah. Several people asking for one more week of class. No way, man. We're finishing. Okay. Next time we go back to Erech. But afterwards, in the days of Gondor's later power, men set a ring wall about the stone of Erech, and built beside it on the hilltop a tall dark tower, and there was guarded the seventh Palantir, which is now lost. The tower is ruinous, and the ring wall is broken, and all about the land it is empty, for none will dwell near the hill of Erech, because it is said that at times the shadow men will gather there, thronging about the ruined wall and whispering. And though their tongue is now long forgotten, it is said that they cry, "We are come." And they wish to fulfill the broken oath and be at rest, but the terror of the dead lies on that hill and the land about. Thither in the blackness before the storm we came, and at last we halted, and Eladon blew his silver horn, and Elrohir unfurled the banner that at the Hornburg he bore still wrapped in grey, later black, and dark as it was, the stars glinted on it, and as it was spread on the wind like a breath of ghosts coming down from the mountains. As it was spread on the wind like a breath of ghosts coming down from the mountains. Nothing could we see but the 7 stars of Elendil, and yet we were aware of a great host gathered all about us upon the hill, and of the sound of answering horns, as if their echo came up out of deep caverns far away. But Aragorn stood by the banner and cried aloud, "The hour is come at last, and the oath shall be fulfilled. I go to Pelargir, and ye shall come behind me, and when all this land is clean, return and be at peace. For I am Elessar, Isildur's heir of Gondor." Look, he's got all his proper names. Okay, so notice the way that the story is being pitched now, right? Now, very, very clearly, Oathbreakers, right? There, there's no like their lingering is the fulfillment of their oath element left here anymore. But what we do get is their desire to fulfill their oath, right? The Oathbreakers have plainly learned their lesson. Right. And the idea that the area around Erech is avoided because haunted, right? The reason that it is haunted by not unquiet spirits who are, harassing living people, but by the unquiet spirits who are just waiting for their opportunity to fill their oath, right? We are come, they say, we are come. They keep coming to the Stone of Erech, where they were supposed to come, right, to rally and meet with Isildur and Anarion, and they didn't, right? And now they keep vainly attempting to fulfill their oath, which can't be fulfilled until the other side also comes, right? So now Aragorn's arrival, the return of the king, he is now in the place of Isildur and Anarion. Now we see him, in the importance, obviously, of that moment of his kingly status, and the element of destiny and prophecy and all those things coming together. I really like this. Okay, good. And we've got still shiny stars on the banner. That's good. Now, you'll remember that very noticeably at one point, so he's called the King of the Dead. You know, they're like, oh, the King of the Dead has come. The people of Lebanon are also calling him the Lord of the Ring. And they say the Lord of the Ring has come. And Christopher, in his long note 34 at the end of this chapter, attempts to explain why on earth Aragorn is being called the Lord of the Ring. Oh, Stephen, that's a great observation. Stephen says, in this version, it's almost like Aragorn is the one summoned, right? Yeah. Now, of course, it's not exactly like he is the one. He's not being obviously conjured up by them, but rather, I do like the element of that I think I like most is the fact that Aragorn coming to the Stone of Erech and blowing the horn, and the dead coming, right? When the dead come back to Erech at the call of the king, then shall the prophecy be fulfilled, right? But it still makes it sound like the agency of the fulfillment of the prophecy are the dead, right? When they come to meet with the king, when they are called and they come, then you know it's time to fulfill the prophecy. Here, with them just constantly showing up, right? It's clear that the agency of the fulfillment of the prophecy is Aragorn. Now, he's involved anyway in summoning them before, but it seems to me the emphasis is slightly different, right? Anytime the king showed up, the prophecy would be fulfilled because they're just waiting. They're just waiting all the time, right? Come on, we're here, right? We're here. We're waiting for it to be fulfilled. So the moment he arrives, they're there. They've been there. Right? He's the one who fulfills the prophecy, and I really like that. Okay, so anyway, so they call him the Lord of the Ring. Why do they call him the Lord of the Ring, you ask? I ask, Christopher asks, and none of us know. So here's this passage that he gives us in the note, which is certainly, as he says, a very intriguing passage. Indeed, all the folk of Lebanon call Aragorn that. I wonder why, said Mary. Mary doesn't know either. I suppose it is some device to draw the eyes of Mordor that way to Aragorn and keep them from Frodo. And he looked east and shuddered. Do you think all his great labor and deeds will be in vain and too late in the end? He said. Frodo's, I assume he means, not Aragorn's. I know not, said Gimli, but one thing I know, and that is not for any device of policy would Aragorn set abroad a false tale. Then either it is true, or he has that, and he has a ring, or it is a false tale invented by someone else. But Elrohir and Eladon have called him by that name, so it must be true. But what it means, we do not know. Okay, so he's called the Lord of the Ring, and here Mary gives a perfectly palatable explanation of this phenomenon, right? Okay, so it's a stratagem. And it's the stratagem, which is like the dominant stratagem that we're using here, right? We want Sauron to think that Aragorn has the ring, because then he's not going to pay any attention to Frodo. So we want him to think that. So Aragorn's going to let people in Lebanon call him the Lord of the Ring, because then hopefully rumor of that will get back to Sauron, and that would be a good thing, right? So, okay. Great explanation, Mary. Thanks for solving the problem. I think you've nailed it, Mary. That theory works brilliantly. But then here, Gimli totally shoots it down, right? No. Aragorn would never spread abroad a false tale. Not for any policy, right? Even if it were smart, he's not going to lie about something like that. So either somebody else invented it, or it's true. And Eladon and Elrohir call him that, so it's obviously true. So he really is the Lord of the Ring. Okay. The question is, what ring? Now, in this note, Christopher explains that, so in the draft where Aragorn is called the Lord of the Ring by the folks of Lebanon, an S is added. So as originally written, it says Aragorn, Lord of the Ring. And then he adds, in different ink, he adds an S. So it's Lord of the Rings. Aragorn, Lord of the Rings. So Christopher makes a shot at explaining this. There is nothing on this page of the draft, or indeed anywhere in the manuscript, that this can refer to, but the cry, the Lord of the Rings has arisen. That is like nothing that passage that we just read can refer to. I have found only one scrap of writing that seems to bear on this. That's Christopher's way of saying I have no idea what this means. Under the text in ink of a piece of rough drafting that referred to in note 39 for the beginning of the story of the march from Minas Tirith are a few furiously penciled lines, parts of which can be read. Galadriel must give her ring to Aragorn. Whoa. Something to wed Finduilas. Whoa. Hence his sudden access of power. Okay. Question mark. That won't work. It will leave Lorien defenseless. Also, Lord of the Ring will be too something or other. Man, how tantalizing is that? Okay. Galadriel must give her ring to Aragorn? It's really hard to draw conclusions from this because we don't even get complete sentences, right? So we get here concepts being raised and we don't really know exactly how they're being connected. So like, for instance, no idea what Aragorn having Galadriel's elf ring would have to do with him marrying Finduilas, right? Can he only marry the elf girl if he has an elf ring? There's lots of precedent. Well, okay, not lots, but some precedent for that not being required, in fact. But I don't really know. Yana says, is this the precursor to Círdan giving his ring to Gandalf? That seems quite possible. Now, there's not been any reference to Gandalf having a ring yet. We have no hint at Gandalf wielding a ring. And Darren's wondering if it's a dowry. Maybe it is a dowry, right? Is he going to give it to Finduilas? Why does she need one, right? I mean, Dad's already got one. But I don't know. Anyway, like I said, I have no clue what that has to do with his wedding. To me, I was about to say the most interesting thing. No, Galadriel giving a ring to Aragorn. That's pretty interesting. But the interesting connection to me is the business about hence his sudden access of power, right? Aragorn takes a pretty big leap forward, right? Trotter the Ranger has been a pretty cool guy all along. But starting at, well, really, especially in book 5, when he meets the Rangers and then looks into the stone and rides the paths of the dead, and, then comes and starts healing folks and stuff like that, right? He's kind of moved to a different level, right? And the interesting thing to me is that Tolkien would even toy with the idea of giving a mechanical explanation for that access of power, right? Yes, he has grown as a character, right? Yes, he's become a much more central part of the story. He does much more. This is not the guy they met in the Inn at Bree, right? Even apart from the fact that he no longer wears wooden shoes. This is not the guy. Even when he was human and a Dunedain, this is a different guy, right? And that Tolkien has the impulse to give this kind of an explanation. It's because he's got an elven ring now, right? Galadriel gave it to him. That's really fascinating to me. Remember, but it's not unprecedented. He does this with the Nazgul, right? The Nazgul are no longer what they were, right? When we meet them again in Gondor in book 5, they are way more powerful than they were in the Shire and Bree back in book 1, right? And he gives an explanation for that. When they return to Sauron, they get upgraded, right? He pours more of his spirit into them, so they are in fact different. And I find it absolutely fascinating that he almost gives Aragorn not a similar explanation in that the mechanics of it are similar, but the fact that it needs explanation, right? That he felt that he almost gave it some explanation like that is really interesting. And Brian points out the significant fact that his deciding against this is not because it diminishes Aragorn's character in some way, but because it would complicate the story of Lorien. Yeah. It would leave Lorien defenseless, and that would be difficult. Now, a couple of you have mentioned, what about the Ring of Barahir? He's got the Ring of Barahir, doesn't he? Maybe that's the ring of which he is the Lord, right? And Christopher never ever mentions it. If we didn't have this scrap here about Galadriel giving her ring to Aragorn, then, I mean, I was thinking of the Ring of Barahir as well. And again, if we didn't have this passage at all, that would seem to me the most obvious explanation. If Gimli is insisting that he must in fact be the Lord of a ring, right? The Ring of Barahir would be my number one candidate for what ring Aragorn would be the Lord of. But that it would be a ring of power, actually, it really does make more sense. I mean, yeah, he's got the Ring of Barahir, but like, so what? It's not a thing to be master of, right? It's not a thing to be lord of. I mean, it's cool. It's an heirloom, but it's not. There's no power in it. Well, Yana, I agree. In a sense, it might be important to the Oathbreakers, but it's an indirect sense, though. There's no reference to the Ring of Barahir at all, during that whole time. So it's not like they, had he shown up and been like, I am Elessar, the heir of Isildur, and they were like, show us your credentials, and he's like, well, I've got this ring, and they're like, well, okay, then we'll follow you, then I'd be 100% behind it, right? But there's not a whiff of anything like that. The ring gets no play whatsoever there. So, the Ring of Barahir, I mean. So, again, like, is that what they're thinking? Maybe, but I don't think we can... I agree that the Ring of Barahir is very logical, to kind of is a very logical suspect, but I don't see any support in the text, any reason to believe that that's the ring that we're talking about. And Jennifer, exactly, the emphasis in the text is on the banner, right? He's got the banner, and the banner shining in the darkness and stuff. That seems to be the thing, not his ring. No reference to that at all. Anyway, okay. So, fascinating. Could it be, therefore, that this is still that when he's going through Lebanon, Tolkien is still operating under the premise, or entertaining at least the idea, that he is wielding one of the Elvish rings at that time? Again, if it sounds crazy, remember, that is going to stick around. Right, it's just going to be Gandalf, as Yana, I think you were suggesting. The idea that we're going to get an Elvish ring handoff to a member of the party, that's going to stick. It's just going to be Gandalf, not Aragorn, and it's going to be Círdan, not Galadriel, because Galadriel still needs it and Círdan doesn't. What's he doing with his? Right? Come on now. Right? It's off on the sidelines over there. Galadriel is at least near the front lines. So, okay. Awesome. We're almost halfway through. That's great. I'm just kidding. Actually, I'm not, but we're good. Okay. So I love this passage that we got a future of Erech, right? One of those narrators, digressions, right? Telling us the future. Really cool. And so ended the tale of Legolas and Gimli concerning the ride of Aragorn by the paths of the dead, which long was recalled and sung in Gondor in after days. And it was said that never again were the shadow men seen by mortal men on mountain nor vale, and the road from Dunharrow was free to all who were willing to take that way. Yet few did so, for the memory of fear abode there still, and none ever dared to open Baldur's door. Confession. I was really kind of wishing that he had said to open Baldur's Gate there. I gotta admit, I was kind of disappointed. Anyway, okay, struck out immediately. A tomb they made for him in that dark place, and so built it that none could come at that door. The passage that I have bracketed was replaced probably at once by the following. But the stone of Erech stood ever alone, and on that hill no bird would alight, nor beast feed, and the memory of fear still abode in the dark ways of Dunharrow, and few were willing to take that road, and none ever dared to open Baldur's door. Okay. So, yeah, Tony, this absolutely sounds like a Findegil digression. I absolutely agree. In later years, the Paths of the Dead becomes a little used highway between. it becomes a bypass, right? It's like the Big Dig. But people don't ever use it, right? So it's Erech, not the Paths of the Dead themselves, that still have this sort of numinous sense to them, right? Birds won't land there, and the memory of fear still abides in the dark ways. So the abiding mystery, yeah, no beast sounds a lot like Tall Brandir, absolutely. Anyway, so the abiding mystery is Baldur, right? The last kind of weird glitch. The last sort of taboo thing, right? Is sort of the stone, at least for birds, right, and beasts, but the tomb of Baldur, the last burying place of Baldur. Okay. But those dead guys, you just can't rely on those dudes, right? I mean, so they go from we're going to remain faithful even after death to we're oathbreakers, but we are ready anytime. We are here. We're just waiting. We're ready to fulfill the oath anytime the king shows up, no matter how many thousands of years we have to wait. But they keep going downhill here. I soon forgot them. The gulls, not the dead guys. For my part, said Gimli. For at last we came to a battle. The Haradrim were driven now to despair and could fly no longer. There at Pelargir lay the sheets of Umbar, 50 great ships and many smaller vessels beyond count. Some few of our enemies reached their ships and put off, seeking either to escape down the river or to reach the far shores, and some they set fire to. But we came too swiftly upon them for many to slip from us so. We were joined by some of the hardier folk of Lebanon and of the Aether, but we were not many when the corsairs turned to bay, and seeing our weakness, their hearts revived, and they assaulted us in their turn. There was stern work there in the twilight by the grey waters, for the shadow host halted and wavered, unwilling at the last, as it seemed, to make war on Sauron. Then Aragorn let blow a horn and cried aloud, saying that if they broke their oath a second time... He interrupts, right? What was he going to do? If you break your oath a second time, so help me, right? I am turning this continent around. I have no idea what Aragorn was going to threaten the dead guys with, right? Okay, you may be doomed now to a perpetual purgatorial existence in the dark mountains, but things are going to get unpleasant, right, if you break your oath a second time, right? No more Mr. Nice King of Gondor, okay? Here my father stopped and rewrote the passage to a form not essentially different from that in The Return of the King, where the shadow host is still said to have hung back at the last, but with no explicit suggestion that they were reluctant to fill the oath, and where for the living there was no need for stern work in the twilight by the grey waters. He wavers, of course. Are the dead guys going to do all the fighting, or at least all the chasing away of bad guys, or are the living gonna fight battles too? And he kept going hither and yon. But to me the important thing here is that is the story of the Oathbreakers, right? Them getting more and more reluctant, and notice what that emphasizes, right? The emphasis becomes more and more on Aragorn, right? It is his will that keeps the dead to their mission. When it comes to it, they've answered his call. They're going to fulfill their oath. They're going to fulfill the prophecy, and yet they still drag their immaterial feet when it comes to it, right? That's really interesting. And what's the consequence? Aragorn has to let blow a horn and command them again. He's already called them together. They've already followed him, but they won't go into battle until his will holds them to it, right? So it really continues to elevate Aragorn's status. Notice again his power, right? It's almost like he's got an elvish ring or something. Okay, enough of the Paths of the Dead. Let's look at the last debate, and then we're almost done. Okay. Read Council of the Lords. This is earlier on. This is a very early version of this. Gandalf warns them that what Denethor said is true. There was no final victory in arms against the enemy. We fought here as best we could because we had to, and it is so appointed in this world. Must be. I think something must be missing here. In this world must be made to evil without final hope. I think I'm missing a word here. I'm not quite sure. But anyway, when we take arms to attack, we are using that power which is preeminently found in the ring. And it would be logical to do, as Denethor desired in that case, to use the ring. So indeed, we should probably now have victory and overthrow Sauron, but only to set up another. So that in the end, the result would be evil, if different, or possibly worse, as if Sauron recovered the ring. Therefore have I something recovery, in order that for a great age victory should be otherwise. But we must still use such power as we have and not delay. Sauron must still be kept busy and deem we have the ring. From the beginning, the essential elements are there, right? We cannot hope to fight against Sauron. The only way we can beat Sauron is with the ring. If we do, it's going to be worse than if we lose, so we might as well lose. We'd be better off losing than to win that way, right? And so we can't hope to beat him, but so let's just distract him, right? And distract him by leading him actively to think that we do have the ring and we are getting ready to use it against him. So this is the core of the plan of the last debate from the beginning, and will remain so. But the coolest part of this chapter, and not only the coolest part of the last debate chapter, but the coolest part of this book, in my opinion, is the unexpurgated version of the last debate, right? When we get those same arguments in much more full detail. My lord, said Gandalf, go forth and fight. Vanity. You may triumph on the fields of Pelennor for a day, but against the power that now arises there is no victory. So said the steward of this city before he died. And though I do not bring you counsels of despair, yet ponder the truth in this. The people of the West are diminished. Far and wide the lands lie empty, and it is long since your rule retreated and left the wild peoples to themselves, and they do not know you, and they will come seeking new lands to dwell in. Now ere it be a matter of war between men, such as has been for many ages. Now, were it but a matter of war between men, such as has been for many ages, I would say, you are now too few to march east, either in wrath or friendship, to subdue or to teach. Yet you might take thought together to make such boundaries and such forts and strongholds as could long be maintained and restrain the gathering tide. change to wild, perhaps. But your war is not only against numbers and swords and spears and untamed peoples. You have an enemy of great power and malice, and he grows, and he it is that fills all the hearts of the wild peoples with hate, and directs and governs that hatred. And so they are become no longer like waves that may roll at whiles against your battlements, to be withstood with valor and defeated with forethought. They are rising in a great tide to engulf you. What then shall you do? Seek to overthrow your enemy. Okay. This is long. Gandalf's explanation here is long, but obviously he's building to the same conclusion, but notice how, right? Okay, so you're at war with the other men, right? The Haradrim are coming up, the Easterlings are coming in, right? This is bad. They're wild men. Remember Faramir's distinctions, right? This is all building off the, when Faramir opened his mouth and started talking and kept talking and all this stuff came out, right? That's still guiding. Those are still some of the guiding concepts behind all this stuff going on, right? So, okay, so you've got the wild men, you had the men, so we had the three divisions of men paralleling the three kindreds of the elves, right? Remember in Faramir's conversation there. So we've got the men of Gondor who are sort of high Númenóreans, but kind of not totally. They're sort of middlemen anyway, but they're not the wild men. And now we've got wild men issues. And Gandalf says, okay, you can't fight them and you can't make treaties with them, right? Notice he's here doing something he doesn't do in the published text, which is circumventing an argument for peace, right? You can't make peace with them, right? That's not going to work. You might think, well, maybe we could reestablish our role, Gondor's role. He brings up this idea of treating with them, of teaching them even, right? No, there's not going to be any peaceful solution because, of course, this is not just a, high men of the light meet wild men of the darkness, right? This is they are being gathered together by an enemy of great power and malice, and he is filling the hearts of the wild people with hate and directing and governing that hatred. And that's a really important point. You notice that? Are the Haradrim evil? Are the Easterlings evil? No, they're wild, right? Their ways are not like the ways of Gondor. Their civilization is in a different place. They have not had the connection with the elves in the West, right? There are many things that they have not learned. But they're not evil. They don't even necessarily, intrinsically, organically hate Gondor, right? But Sauron is making them do so. They are enslaved, right? The people of the East, the people of Harad, are enslaved spiritually by Sauron. And one of the interesting sort of results of this speech is his emphasizing not only you can't overcome them because they're way more than you are and they're being governed by this enemy who's bringing them against you and is going to give up. It's not just that the war is hopeless. It's that there's even almost something questionable about, like, they're victims too, those guys, right? The other men, the wild men. There's almost this implication that the role that Gondor should be having is as teacher, right? Like the Númenóreans back in the good old days. But that's off the table because of Sauron. And yet, Tony, exactly, it's more of a spiritual war than a military one, is Gandalf's point here. Absolutely. But if we should find the ring and wield it, how would it give us victory? Asked Imrahil. Gandalf's explanation of the mechanics of this are, nowhere else is this explained, right? This is a fascinating paragraph. "It would not do so all in a day," answered Gandalf, "but were it to come to the hand of someone of power or royalty, as, say, the Lord Aragorn, or the steward of this city, or Elrond of Ilmagist, or even to me, then he, being the Ring Lord, would wax ever in power and the desire of power, and all minds he would cow or dominate, so that they would blindly do his will, and he could not be slain. More, the deepest secrets of the mind and heart of Sauron would become plain to him, so that the Dark Lord could do nothing unforeseen. The Ring Lord would suck the very power and thought from him, from Sauron, so that all would forsake his allegiance and follow the Ring Lord, and they would serve him and worship him as a god. And so Sauron would be overthrown utterly and fade into oblivion. But behold, there would be Sauron still, but upon the other side, a tyrant brooking no freedom, shrinking from no deed of evil to hold his sway and to widen it. And worse, said Aragorn, for all that is left of the ancient power and wisdom of the West, he would also have broken and corrupted. At least Sauron is honestly opposed to the West, and so therefore the ancient power and wisdom of the West and those who remember it gather together to fight against him, right? If one of them, if Aragorn or Elrond or Gandalf or even Denethor had taken the Ring of Power and become the Ring Lord, they would have corrupted the ancient power and wisdom of the West itself, right? And so that would have been even worse. Good. This notion of the Ring Lord sucking the very power and thought from Sauron, right? So it's not just a matter of the one who takes and wields the Ring of Power will become as powerful as Sauron, right? And will be able to destroy him, but will become as bad as he was, right? It's not just that. It's not just parallel to. The power of Sauron is not like the measuring stick by which we measure the power of the new Ring Lord. He will become as powerful as Sauron. No, he will get the power of... He will siphon off the power of Sauron and make it himself. And through that power, that desire for power as well, that dominion over others, that enslavement of the thoughts and will of other people, down to being worshipped as a god, right? Sauron will fade into oblivion, but Sauron will still be, right? Because the former good guy is going to become not just as bad as Sauron. Again, he's not just a measuring stick. It's going to become him in a deeper sense. This is really kind of fascinating in lots of ways. But one thing that I would emphasize, notice the consequence of this concept. I'm not convinced. So it's possible, by the way, to say, okay, so Gandalf is explicitly spelling this out here. This passage is cut from the final text, but that doesn't prove that Gandalf isn't thinking this, right? Gandalf is still thinking this. He doesn't say it anymore in the published text. So you could make the argument that this is the explanation of what's really going on, right? Even though it's not spelled out in the main text. And that's possible. But I wonder, because in the published text, it's not just that Gandalf doesn't say this, but some of the things that he does say suggest that this isn't so. If this were still true in the published text, notice Sauron is equally hosed. Whether the ring is destroyed or whether the ring is claimed by somebody else, Sauron is going to get almost obliterated either way, right? Sauron's fate, should Aragorn claim the ring, Sauron's fate would be just as bad, almost exactly as bad, as if the ring were destroyed. And I mean, I can see how that would motivate him to try to take action against Aragorn, but it doesn't really seem to me to square with the things that Aragorn and Gandalf say in the published text. That basically that Sauron is going to wait until, he's going to look for a time of division, and he's going to wait until one of them puts himself forward, right, and then he's going to move against him, right? If this were still true, it would be kind of too late for Sauron to move against anybody, right? If at the time the new Ring Lord is established, he like sucks the essence out of Sauron, and Sauron is overthrown utterly and fading into oblivion, then sorry again, as I say, it's already too late for Sauron. Tim, exactly. Sauron would be enslaved to his own ring by the new Ring Lord. Yes, essentially. Now, you're right, Brian. It's possible that the ring could fall into the hands of someone who couldn't use it successfully. But again, Gandalf knows, presumably Sauron does too, that ain't Aragorn, right? The whole kind of premise from the Hornburg on, right, from Aragorn's looking into the Orthanc Stone on, is that he's got the ring, right? That he's the Lord of the Ring. Sauron would know that he could do it, right? Now, Matt, you're right. It wouldn't all happen in a day, right? Exactly as Gandalf says. So, maybe there's still enough time for him to move. Possibly. But what it certainly does is emphasize what cause Sauron has to panic, right? Why is it that Sauron so completely sells out? Why does he take the bait so completely, right? And the answer, this is one answer, because this is the future that is in store for him. Not just the arming of a rival beyond where, so that maybe he, the new rival Aragorn, would be able to defeat him, right? No, it's not that. It's for Sauron much, much worse than that. And it also, for me, it just kind of changes things. Thinking about the fact that Sauron's in a cleft stick of his own cutting, right? I mean, Sauron is what's Pippin's phrase? Either way, his outlook is poor, right? Either way, his outlook is poor. The world of trouble that Sauron is in here, the extent of Sauron's own despair. Sauron has to be not just moving prematurely, not even just panicking, right? Sauron has to be near despair. The clock is ticking, and he's not got not that much time. He wouldn't do so in a day, but how many days has he got? Anyway, fascinating. And then the best quotation that's not in the published text. By far, hands down, my favorite thing that we have seen from the cutting room floor. Then what is the use of this ring? Said Imrahil. Victory, said Gandalf, changed immediately to Hurin, Warden of the Keys. At least we should have won the war, and not this foul Lord of Mordor. So might many a brave knight of the Mark or the Realm speak, said Imrahil. But surely more wisdom is required of lords in council. Victory is in itself worthless. Unless Gondor stand for some good, then let it not stand at all. And if Mordor doth not stand for some evil that we will not brook in Mordor or out of it, then let it triumph. Victory is in itself worthless. I tweeted this passage earlier today from Victory is in itself worthless on and said I want this on a poster. I really do. I want this framed. This is one of my goals now. I want a framed copy of that quotation. That is absolutely fantastic. In fact, just to get slightly autobiographical for a minute, this is kind of the premise on which I've kind of run Signum University, actually, from the beginning. And it's funny because I had forgotten about this quote entirely. And yet I find I've been paraphrasing it, essentially, at several points. Many times people have sort of questioned whether or not the premises on which Signum is based will work, right? Is that the way to succeed long term? Is this really going to thrive financially? And my response has always been, if we cannot, success in itself is worthless, right? A business continuing and prospering, what is that worth, right? What does that gain? I would rather attempt to do things the right way, even if that means failing, right? Even if that means we go under. I would rather have done that and go under. And if we can't succeed financially without compromising the things that I think are so important, the things that make Signum different from what everybody else is doing, right? If we can't succeed without that, then we don't deserve to succeed, then let it not stand at all. It's been kind of exactly the premise upon which I've been operating, actually. Victory in itself is worthless. Anyway, I don't have much else to say about this passage apart from the fact that this is just really wonderful. Then let it triumph. Let Mordor triumph. If it doth not stand for some evil, that we will not brook in Mordor or out of it. And think how this goes also with Gandalf's earlier passage about the Easterlings and the Haradrim, right? Thinking of sports teams for a second, Imrahil says, we're not rooting for laundry here, folks, right? This is not about our team has to win at all costs, right? We are on Gondor's side, and so Gondor must win at all, no matter what happens. If Gondor wins, that's good, right? And if Mordor, because they're our enemy, if they lose, then that's good. And Imrahil says, that's not how it works, right? We fight for Gondor not because it's Gondor. We're not just fighting for the home team, right? We are fighting for something that means something. We are defending, and if we no longer fight for that, if we no longer defend that, then what do we have to fight for? What's the point of fighting, right? There isn't any point. And if Mordor is not worth opposing, if by opposing Mordor, we're not opposing something bigger and more important, right? If we're not standing against a real evil that is seeking to do evil and extend and perpetuate evil, if we're not standing against that, then why stand, right? If this were just us and the Easterlings, if they wanted to expand and we would quite rather they didn't, right? And it were not, and this, we weren't standing for some good and they weren't standing for some evil, situation is not nearly as clear, right? Awesome wisdom from Prince Imrahil, and I'm awfully glad he exists. The strong statements of Gandalf about his despair, right? Not just that he's worried, but hearing him describe his moment of despair. Now it is known to you that I have set the ring in peril. From Faramir, we learn that it passed to the very borders of Mordor before this assault began, maybe on the first day of the darkness. And, my lords, it went by the way of Morgul. Slender indeed is the hope that the bearer can have escaped the perils of that way, of the horrors that wait there. Still less is the hope that even if he comes through them to the Black Land, he can pass there unmarked. 6 days have gone, and hourly I watch the signs with great dread in my heart. What are these signs that you look for? An enemy something, you on our something? Asked Imrahil. Darkness, said Gandalf. That is my dread. And darkness began, and therefore for a while I felt a despair deeper than Denethor. But the darkness that is to be feared is not such as we have endured. It would not need clouds in the air. It would begin in our hearts, feeling afar the power of the Ringlord, and grow till by sunlight or moonlight or under heaven or under roof, all would seem dark to us. This darkness was but a device to make us despair, and it has, as such deceits, something our enemy. The next sign is strife among the lords. A following draft reaches Gandalf's argument as it appears in The Return of the King. Anyway, we'll come back to that in a second. So, first there is Gandalf's description of his moment of despair, even before Faramir told him, right? Remember that moment when Faramir is reporting about meeting with Frodo and how Frodo went on to Morgul and Gandalf's like freaking out, right? Or is like trying not to freak out. Gandalf is suggesting even before that, the reason he was freaking out when he was talking to Faramir is that Faramir's words seemed to confirm what he was already despairing at the thought of, right? The darkness has come. So this is Gandalf's answer to the question. If Sauron got the ring, what would happen? What would Sauron's inescapable victory look like if he got the ring? And Gandalf answers that question. What would it look like? Darkness. It would look like darkness. The darkness that would come would not be a physical darkness, not a pall of clouds in the sky that just makes it hard to see. No, the darkness that Sauron would send if he got the ring back is a darkness that would fill our own hearts, so that even if we were walking under the sunrise, we would still be in darkness, right? The sunlight and moonlight itself would become as darkness to us because our own hearts and wills would be darkened by the will of Sauron. That's what you'd look for, right? That's how you would know that Sauron got the ring. So he's saying to himself, all right, if Sauron gets the ring, what it would look like is going to be darkness spreading over the land. Oh boy. Look at darkness spreading over the land, right? And he's like, oh man, that's it. That's it. So when the dawnless day comes, Gandalf's response is despair. His first thought is, Frodo's failed, right? Frodo's been captured. Sauron has the ring. But he rallies, right? Even before he learns more, he rallies as he realizes, no, this isn't that darkness. This is a shadow of that shadow, right? This is only a superficial darkness. This is only an instrument that Sauron is trying to use to artificially create the despair in our hearts that he could immediately and forcibly create if he did have the ring. Tom says you can see in Uncle Imrahil where Faramir gets his ideals. Faramir and Imrahil do seem to have a lot in common in that way. So anyway, this is just wonderful to hear Gandalf speaking this explicitly about all these things. And it gives this, I think, I can't help but think that this is still going on in the published text, right? Gandalf doesn't explain it all, but that this is still what's going on in Gandalf's head. But of course, the other thing, the thing that Sauron would look for, how would Sauron know that they have the ring, that a new ring lord is arising? And the answer is strife among the lords, right? That's what it would look like. And then Christopher adds, and I love this bit. This never occurred to me. This never would have occurred to me. He adds to those signs that Sauron will have observed. He may also have seen in the stone the death of Denethor, and since he judges all by himself, he may well deem that a first sign of strife among his chief foes. That is incredible. That is incredible. To imagine Sauron, I never, ever, ever would have thought of this. Sauron sitting there looking in his Palantir, right? And what does he see? When he looks towards Minas Tirith, he sees Denethor in flames. He sees Denethor being burned alive. those savages, right? Oh man, boy, there's strife among the lords, and then there's strife among the lords, right? Holy cow. So if those guys over there across the river have already sunk to burning each other alive, right? I'll show my rival, right? Who's boss over here? Ergo, the king has returned, doggone it, right? Don't like it, Denethor? I'm going to set you on fire. Right? I'm going to burn you alive, and I'm going to make Sauron watch. I'm going to give you the Palantir. I'm going to force you to hold the Palantir in your hands while I burn you alive, right? And that way Sauron will know, like, this will be a message, right? It's, Gandalf's like, this is how Sauron would think. It never occurred to me that Sauron would draw that conclusion from what he saw, but it makes perfect sense, right? How else would Sauron interpret what he sees? He's not going to really get the madness of Denethor exactly, is he? I mean, he did encourage the madness of Denethor, but I love this reading. It is awesome. Okay, couple odds and ends, and then we're done. So this... Okay. Then even as they debated, a rider came in search of Éomer. Lord, he said, word has come from Anorion, from the north roads. Theoden king, when we rode hither, left men behind to watch the movements of the enemy at Amundine. They sent word that there has been war far away in the wold, and thence come strange tidings. For some say the very woods have changed too. For some have said that wild things of the woods have fallen on the orcs and driven them into the river and the rapids of Sarngebir. But the army that was on the road has heard this news, and also of our victory here, and is afraid, and even now hastening back. Ha, said Éomer, if they dare to assail us, they will rue it. If they seek to fly past, they shall be smitten. We must cut off this finger of the black hand, ere it is withdrawn. Treebeard still needing to make the book, right? We've seen he so wants to bring Treebeard back in. He so wants to get, and even as he's dialing back, the Ents and to get this, we at least want to get a second-hand account, right, of the Ents coming in and attacking the orcs. And of course, in the final published text, Treebeard just kind of mentions it in passing, right? We don't get any kind of account of the war between it still happens, right? But we don't get any. So they don't get to come to Dagorlad anymore. They don't even, but this is like the last. So, Treebeard has a really good agent who is trying to get him better billing in the Return of the King. But at the end of the day, they still keep cutting back. Yeah, good. Okay. Very, very brief reference, but a fascinating moment. This is just that like random bit that happened to be on the piece of manuscript that some of this chapter was written on. Rescue of Frodo. Frodo is lying naked in the tower, but Sam finds by some chance that the elven cloak of Lorien is lying in a corner. When they disguise themselves, they put on the grey cloaks over all and become practically invisible. In Mordor, the cloaks of the elves become like a dark mantle of shadow. And that is really the reason that is so interesting to me, is that it belies what is in the published text about the cloaks, right? Sam says, are these magic cloaks? And the elves are like, I don't know what you mean by that, right? In what sense are they magic clothes? They're elvish garments, certainly, right? What that means is the elves put the thought of all they love into all they make. And we've talked about that before in other contexts, but, or was it Exploring the Lord of the Rings where I was just talking about that? No, I think it was when I was talking about the barrow blade. But anyway, never mind. The point is, these are magic cloaks, it turns out, right? If the elves put the thought of all that they love into all that they make, does all that they love include dark mantle of the shadow? Is in the cloaks as well. The thought of the shadow was put in there. They're not just magic invisibility cloaks, right? Or magic camouflage cloaks. Except they are acting like magic camouflage cloaks. So that in itself is kind of interesting. And yeah, Yana, there is a striking resemblance. It's not exactly to the Nazgul cloaks, because the Nazgul cloaks, in fact, it's almost opposite to the Nazgul cloaks, right? The Nazgul cloaks are black, but they're plain cloaks. They're the least shadowy thing about them, right? They're the most tangible element of. If you take a sword and you slash at the Nazgul, you might hit nothing but cloak, right? Which will have a perfectly ordinary cut in it, like any other cloak. But yet, nevertheless, I agree that its dark mantle of shadow is very ringwraithy, right? Much more ringwraithy than I would expect elvish cloaks to get at any time. But yeah, anyway, so yeah, that similarity is certainly very very important. And yes, James Liebach and Tom Hillman at exactly the same time said, but it's also like Luthien, right? Yeah, it is like Luthien, the dark mantle of shadow. But there, of course, that is and you're thinking of her sleepy cloak, right? The one that she wove out of her own hair, which is therefore, because her hair is black, dark and shadowy, her cloak. Yes, it is like that. So again, it's not that there's no precedent, but even there, does this suggest that the idea of the magic cloaks of Lorien are more like Luthien's cloak than like the description that we get later? Because Luthien's cloak, if Sam asked Luthien, is that a magic cloak? She would kind of have to have said yes, right? I mean, she did spells, and there were like bowls of like special water in the moonlight, and there were material components and songs and everything. It was a magic spell, right? She was definitely casting a spell in order to make that cloak. And no, Lynn, I agree. Not all shadows are bad shadows. You're absolutely right. And again, Luthien is certainly a good example of that. But my point is, it suggests that this does not work like the way that we are told in the published text they work, right? So, again, my point is the one I was just making there at the end. When Sam says, are these magic cloaks, the elves can be like, no, not exactly, right? It's not really how it works. With Luthien, that was how it works. It was magic. It was a spell. She used the word spell. Exactly, yeah, there's no plausible deniability about the magic cloaks here. So it's interesting to see that he is still... Without this passage, I wouldn't have guessed necessarily that the cloaks were still that far down towards the Book of Lost Tales end of the spectrum when it came to, magic things. Okay. Christopher Tolkien gives us this random passage without explanation. On the back of the last page of this typescript is the following remarkable passage on which I can cast no light. It is written in a fine ornate script, together with other odds and ends of phrases in the same manuscript, characteristic of my father's habit of doodling in this way. Then spoke Elessar. Many, Guthrond, would hold that your insolence merited rather punishment than answer from your king. But since you have in open malice uttered lies in the hearing of many, I will first lay bare their falsehood, so that all here may know you for what you are and have ever been. Afterwards, maybe, a chance shall be given you to repent and turn from your old evil. Who is Guthrond? To whom was he lying? About what? We don't know, right? Christopher says he can cast no light on this passage at all. It would seem to be one of those King Elessar sitting in judgment, like with the Baragond passage, right? No idea. Jennifer, clearly with the Elessar thing, it's clearly after he's made king. No idea who Guthrond is or what's going on here. Is Guthrond a person or a group of people? I think Guthrond... Okay. So, Stephen, my reading is that there should be commas around Guthrond. I think it's many Guthrond. So, hey, Guthrond, many would hold that your insolence merited. That's how you read. This is direct address to Guthrond, I believe. Guthrond is the bad guy here. I'm guessing he's Rohirric. He must be from Rohan? Guthrond sounds Rohirric to me. But anyway, we don't know anything about this. However, nevertheless, I think this is a really, really awesome moment. Those of you who have been around for a long time, remember The Lost Road? Volume 5? Yes, 5. Volume 5 of the History of Middle-earth. So remember The Lost Road? And in the early chapters of The Lost Road, with Alboin and Audwin, the guy who, from his childhood, has these elvish words just kind of pop in and come to him, right? And he doesn't know exactly where they come from, but he describes the experience, the sensation, right? That like he just wakes up knowing that, Isil means moon, right, in one elf language, but Ithil also means moon in the other elf language, right? He just kind of, it's like he hears it. It's like he's getting these things like messages, so he's not sure like sort of where it's floating into him from, right? But it's floating, it's definitely coming from somewhere. And The Lost Road is kind of the story that's explaining, is a story that's explaining sort of how that happens and where it comes from, right? And why it comes to him. And at the time when we were talking about The Lost Road, I was emphasizing that it's, there are really two places in Tolkien's fiction where and I've been talking about this since literally the very first podcast episode I ever recorded. I've been talking about how I try to resist thinking too much about, applying this to Tolkien's life, thinking about, because to me, the question, what does this tell us about Tolkien's life, is just not as interesting a question as other questions we can be asking. And if you read the story only for the purpose of trying to understand the psychology of the author better, then Tolkien would say, in fact, did say, that you were missing the point. But there are a couple places where I can't help but hear autobiography, where Tolkien, just from what we do know of him, seems to be describing in fiction his own experience. One is Leaf by Niggle, the short story Leaf by Niggle. Allegorized version of his own experience, but still what really seems to be about his own experience as a creative artist, and of course he kind of admitted that later on. The Lost Road is the other, and it's that character sounds just like him. My point is, his father's habit of doodling in this way, right? Of just jotting down these random passages, these things. And it reminds me of The Lost Road, right? Christopher can cast no light on this passage. Why can Christopher cast no light on this passage? I think pretty clearly because Tolkien could have cast no light on this passage. Tolkien doesn't understand this, right? If you ask Tolkien, who's Guthrond? I would bet almost anything that his response would be, I have no idea who Guthrond is, right? So, like, what insolent thing did Guthrond do? No idea what insolent thing Guthrond did. I really don't think that he knew. And we've seen at many points, and we've talked about him discovering things, right? This seems to be another one of those moments where he's discovered something, but he never figures it out. It floats off, right? It never gets detached to the rest of the narrative because he never discovers what it means. He never discovers how it fits. But here's this bit, and look how fully formed this bit is, right? This is not just an outline. This is not just a concept. This is like something overheard through a keyhole, right? But you don't know the context, and then like somebody's coming and you have to get it, and you never hear the rest of it, right? It's like a piece of overheard conversation that gets doodled onto the page of TypeScript, and he never does learn the whole story behind Guthrond. And that's just so. Although this passage is it seems totally out there, right? And might not necessarily it certainly doesn't contribute very much that's very concrete to our understanding of Aragorn, for instance. And yet, it does, I think, show us something really important and something really exciting about Tolkien's own process, his own creative process. Not something brand new, but it's a startling illustration of this thing that we've seen before. Okay, this is it. Final slide. No more is said in the draft of the history of the lieutenant of Barad-dûr, the nameless mouth of Sauron, than that it is told that he was a living man, I think. A living man, who, being captured as a youth, became a servant of the Dark Tower, and because of his cunning, grew high in the Lord's favor. That is, okay, so we've decided this dude is not a wraith, right? He's not an unquiet spirit. He's not a fell spirit of the ancient days. He's just a guy who, as a child, was captured and was cunning and grew high in Sauron's favor. In the fair copy, this was repeated, but was changed subsequently to, but it is said that he was a renegade, son of a house of wise and noble men in Gondor, who, becoming enamored of evil knowledge, entered the service of the Dark Tower, and because of his cunning and the fertile cruelty of his mind and servility, he grew ever higher in the Lord's favor. These phrases being thus bracketed in the original. In the Return of the King, the mouth of Sauron came of the race of those that are named the Black Númenóreans. Exactly, James. Yeah, he started out in the mailroom and worked his way up. Absolutely. Brianna, you're right. This would be a great premise this would be a great subplot in the Amazon series. Absolutely. I want to see juvenile mouth of Sauron first captured, that we totally need his backstory. We can connect it with the backstory of young Aragorn. Why not? Right? It'd be great. Anyway, yeah. So we've abandoned remember, first Sauron was going to come out and parley, and then we didn't want Sauron to come out. So then it was going to be the Wizard King. If it's not going to be him, it's got to be his second-hand guy, right? His right-hand guy, not his second-hand guy. That's different. That's a totally different thing. Actually, the Ringwraith kind of was a second-hand guy, if you think about it. But anyway, okay, right. So you get his right-hand guy, and that's the Wizard King. So we resurrect the Wizard King from read death, or whatever it was, in order to bring him back, and we're going to prevent Éowyn killing him. Now that's out, right? He's gonna be re-killed, and he's gonna remain re-killed, and so he gives this important role to an increasingly marginal character, and the one glimpse that we're given of him then is that he becomes, I don't know, not quite like, he's not like the anti-Aragorn in the sense that he has some kind of heritage or destiny. But that there is, I mean, if you think about it, the mouth of Sauron is quite unique, right? Nowhere else do we get, I don't know, I just did the thing where I used an adverb to modify the adjective unique, which you're never supposed to do. But he is unique, right? Every other major servant of Sauron that we've gotten has been either a wraith or an orc, right? Or somebody, I mean, the Haradrim have captains and generals and kings, right? But none of them are, we don't see any of them. And remember, we just got that long speech from Gandalf about how they're not intrinsically evil, right? They're not really dedicated to evil. They're being dominated and enslaved by the will of Sauron, right? This guy's a collaborator. So he's an interesting kind of counterpoint to some of Gandalf's speeches, right? Okay, so the enemy is not necessarily all bad. They're being misled and manipulated and deceived and even enslaved by Sauron. Sauron is the real enemy. Oh, except this guy. This guy is the enemy too, right? He has bought in all the way, right? The fertile cruelty of his mind, right? And that combination of fertile cruelty and servility that really make him, move up the ladder there. Brian Dimmick says, maybe his real name is Guthrond. I love it. That's Guthrond. There you go. There you go. There's a little more than just impudent. No, it wasn't impudent. What was the word? What was the word? Insolent. Yeah, not just insolent. Oh, that's interesting. James says he's like a fallen Boromir, right? Yeah, so we get the maybe a bit of a glimpse of what. Now, Boromir, in a sense, Boromir would have been more tragic, right? Because he was still at least, had good motives. This guy never had good motives that we know of, right? I mean, he's been trying to win friends and influence people, among the baddies for his whole life. Original draft Boromir, perhaps. Something like it, right? Maybe. Catriona says this guy is what Bill Ferny aspired to be. Yeah, I agree. I agree, Catriona. Yeah, Bill Ferny has a poster of this guy, absolutely, at his hunting lodge. This is the personal role model of the Bill Fernys of the world. Yeah, that seems exactly correct. Okay, good. All right. And with that, we are done with, not quite with the History of Middle-earth series, that we're finished with all three of or not quite with the History of the Lord of the Rings series. But thus, we have completed Book 8 of the History of Middle-earth, as we are now fully 2/3 of the way through the entire History of Middle-earth series, and we shall resume with Book 9, thanks to the votes of the electorate, and continue finishing the end, finding out what happens with Book 6, reading the epilogue that was, what was old Gamgee going to be saying with his children and everything later on. So we'll get that stuff, and then we'll read the Notion Club papers, which is a really exciting piece of fiction where he's going to go back to the Lost Road ideas and kind of return to that story and take it in a different direction. So we're going to get the Notion Club papers, which are really, really interesting, and some more Numenor stuff as well. That's what we'll get in Sauron Defeated. But first, Sir Thomas Malory, Le Morte d'Arthur. We're going to get our Middle English on, and we're going to read one of the great classics of all of English literature and the cornerstone of all modern Arthurian. Really, as I say, kind of the centerpiece, I would say, of like the entire of the entire Arthurian tradition. So, thanks all for joining me. We will be back in 3 weeks. 3 weeks from today, on the 11th of July, we will begin our discussion of Sir Thomas Malory. Thanks everybody for joining us. I didn't do two. It's late. I know it's late, but I started a little bit late, and then we talked about Malory. This was remember the Princess Bride class where I went for like 3.5 hours on the last session.
The Mythgard Academy has been offering in-depth discussions of awesome books and films since 2013, completely free to attend and free to download. If you've enjoyed our discussions and would like to help them continue, please consider donating at